Hello all, this is Anis with you. Welcome to my channel. From this video, we are going to learn what are remote validations and where we can apply the benefits of remote validations. Remote validation is the process where we can validate specific data by posting only that data to the server without posting the entire form data to the server. For example, during a user registration process, it would be nice if we show the error message to the user in advance that the entered email ID or user ID is already taken. Instead of validating the form in the server-side validation process and redirecting him to the error page after submitting the form. Now let's see the demo of the application where the remote validations are properly implemented. This is the listing screen of the supplier module from our inventory project. Here, let's click the create new button to load the supplier creation screen. This is the supplier creation screen of our inventory project. Let's enter the supplier code. Then enter the supplier company name. After that, let's enter the email ID as anis@anis.com. Notice once we enter the email ID, we get an error message saying email ID already exists. This is called remote validation. An AJAX call happens behind the scene by ASP.NET Core to check the database for the existence of email ID. If it exists, then it throws the error message. And now let's change it to anis1@anis.com. Notice again, now the error is disappeared. Then let's fill the remaining fields. First phone number as some random numbers, followed by address as Dubai, then UAE, and then Earth. Of course, all are in the Earth, right? And then press the create button. Wow, the supplier is successfully saved. Then after, let's click the edit button for the supplier item which we just created. Now change the email ID to anis@anis.com. Notice in the edit screen also we are getting the error. At the same time, when we change back the email ID to anis1@anis.com, then the error has disappeared. But anis1@anis.com is also exists in the database. Then why the error did not come? That's because it knows that anis1@anis.com belongs to this supplier. So it ignores this supplier and checks only in the other supplier items. Okay, let's change the name to Anis Textiles and Garments. After that, let's click the save button to update the changes back to the database. Wow, the changes are updated back to the database. That's nice. This module also has the sorting and searching capabilities. In case if you are following this series, then you must be already knowing it. But if you have joined just now, I request you to follow this series. The playlist link is in the description box. Hey, actually it is a nice project, so help me to make it big with your likes and subscriptions. Okay, that's for the demo. Let's see how it is made. In order to save time, I have created the required files of the record, but don't worry, I will explain each and every part of the code. Actually, this is the supplier controller, which is very similar to the unit controller or any other controller. In case if you are following this series from the beginning, then you might be well known of unit controller. Even if you are not, it is okay, you can still follow from here. Now the important code to follow. First, let's add a method named isEmailID exists. Notice this method returns the JSON result. This is the first time we are seeing a method returning JSON result in this series. And next, add accept verbs attribute with get and post values. That means this method can be called by get and post verbs. After that, declare a boolean variable named isExist and set it to repository.isSupplierExist of email ID. If isExist equals to true, then we should return false in the JSON result. because we found a broken rule here. Else return true in the JSON result. It means the email ID is valid and we don't need to raise any validation error. And next, go to the supplier model. Supplier model is like a normal supplier model. I will show you the complete code once I am done. So no need to note down anything now. First, listen and understand the logic. That's important. In here, I am adding an attribute called remote. This attribute is going to do magic for us. The remote attribute is present in MVC namespace. So let's include the Microsoft.ASP.core.mvc namespace to our supplier model. Wow, now the error indicator is disappeared. Then in this remote attribute, inside the parentheses, add the name of the method which needs to be called to check the uniqueness of email ID. In our case, the method name is isEmailExist. So add isEmailExist as the first parameter of the remote attribute. After that, we need to add the controller name which owns this emailExist method. In our case, it is the supplier controller. So add supplier as the second parameter. Then after, add the error message which will get displayed in case the remote validation fails. Okay, that's it. Let's run and check is the remote validation is working or not. Now let's enter the code and name first. After that, we will enter the email ID as anis@anis.com. Notice here the error message is displayed immediately because there is an supplier exists with the same email ID. Actually, after we complete entering the email ID, behind the scenes, the ASP.NET Core MVC framework does an AJAX call to the supplier controls isEmailID exists method and returns the error if the email ID is already present. So nice, isn't it? And now let's enter anis@mohammed.com. So now the error got disappeared because there is no supplier found with this email ID. Again, let me try with another ID that also exists in the database. Yes, we are getting the error message. So our code is working fine as expected. Now change the email ID to 123@123.com and fill the other fields, and then let's press the create button to save the supplier. Wow, the supplier is successfully saved and we are being sent to the supplier listing page with a nice bootstrap alert. After that, let's load a supplier in the edit mode and we'll make some modifications to the supplier name. And then we'll try to save the supplier record. Oh no, it is not saving and throwing an error saying email ID already exists. This is a big flaw in the program. Actually, why this error comes? Because the program is not excluding this record for checking the email ID existence. But it's supposed to ignore this record and needs to check only in the rest of the supplier's data, right? So let's add that code to ignore the supplier during the edit mode. So open the supplier model, locate the email ID property, and in the remote attribute, after the controller parameter, add a new parameter named additional fields and set this additional fields parameter to ID. Now the interesting thing is going to happen. When this remote validation calls the isEmailID exists method of the supplier controller, it also passes the value for the ID parameter along with the email ID. Then after, open the supplier controller and locate the isEmailID exists method. And in here, let's add a new parameter named ID of type integer to our existing isEmailID exists method. Please note that the name of the parameter is very important. it should match with the property name which will be passed through the additional fields. After that, open the supplier repository class file. Notice here we have two methods having the same name is supplier email exists. The first one is accepting only the email parameter which we will use at the time of creating a supplier. The second method accepts two parameters email ID and ID. This method will be called during the edit mode. And then come back to the supplier controller. In here pass the ID parameter in the isSupplierEmailExist method of our supplier repo. So now we are passing both the parameters to the isSupplierEmailExist method. After that, let's run the application and we'll load a supplier item in the edit mode. Then change the supplier name from Anish Softwares to Anish Softwares and Services. Then after, let's navigate to the email field, then to phone number field, then finally to the address field. Notice now we are not getting the error because now the program ignores this record while checking for the email ID existence. That's why we don't get any error. But I want to prove this. So to prove and verify this point, let's change the email ID to 123@123.com. Notice now it shows the error message because the email ID 123@123.com already exists in the database and the current owner of that email ID is not this supplier. So it rejects the modification and shows the error. Okay, now let's change back the email ID to anish@anish.com. Even anish@anish.com is also present in the database, but it did not show any error message. This is because the present owner of the anish@anish.com is this supplier. After that, let's try to save the supplier by clicking the save button. Perfect. This time the supplier record is saved successfully. So our remote validation codes are working fine. Hello all, making YouTube video takes lot of time and efforts. But all these efforts should have a meaning. So please like, comment and share this video. Thanks a lot. Let's continue to the tutorial. Please do not forget to subscribe to this channel and press the bell icon to get notified. Now we are done with the supplier module of our inventory project. So let's see the complete code. If you want, you can copy the codes. I will show slowly. First, let's open the supplier model. Then after, let's remove the unused namespaces from the supplier model. In here, the main property to note down from the supplier model is email ID because this is the property which has the remote validation attribute. Then after, let's open the iSupplier interface. This is the interface file. And some of you have asked in the comments why am I returning the supplier object in create, edit and delete methods. Actually, we can make these methods to return void. But we have done a real-time project which is successfully running now for at least 6 years now. In that project, the client requirement is to save the history for all the objects in a separate history database. In that project, we had created a loosely coupled history object which will collect the return object of every modifications from the repository and serialize it to a binary stream and will save it in a history table. But that is very advanced concept. So I am keeping that option open in pipeline. Definitely I will add the history logics to this software after I complete the transaction modules. Okay, let's come back to the code. Then open the supplier repository file. As usual, let's remove all the unused namespaces from the supplier repos using section. And then let's go through the methods of the supplier repo. As usual, we declare a private read-only variable of type inventory context. Then we receive the value for this context variable through the constructor method. After that, we create the create method of the supplier repo. This method receives the supplier object from the controller and saves that to the database. Then let's move to the delete method of the supplier repo. This method receives the supplier object which needs to be deleted from the database and deletes the same from the database. After that, we will look the edit method of the supplier object. This is very similar to the delete method. The only difference is here we change the entity state to entity state.modified and calls the save changes method of the context. Then the next method is getItem method. This is an one-line method which fetches the required supplier by passing the ID to the context object. And after that, we will move on to the doSort method. This is slightly complicated method and I had uploaded a separate detailed video on how sorting is done for this project. So I kindly request you to watch the sorting video to understand how this works. Then let's move to the getItems method. This method also follows the same prototype. So if you go through the sorting video, you will get a better knowledge on this also. The next method is supplier code exists. Here we check is the supplier code is already present in the database or not by querying the contacts.suppliers collection. After that, we also have an overloaded version of isSupplierCodeExist method. This is because during the edit mode of the record, we need to use this method to ignore the current supplier object and check only in the rest of the supplier collection. Next method is isSupplierEmailExist. We have already seen this method, so just copy and we will move on to the next method. Again we have an overloaded version of the same method is supplier email exists method. This is used for the edit mode. After that, there are two methods exist to check the uniqueness of the supplier name. Okay, that's it with the supplier repo. Hope you have copied the complete source code of the supplier repo class. Then after, let's open the supplier controller and as usual we will remove all the unused namespaces from the using section. Then after, we have declared a read-only interface of type iSupplier. The repository will be supplied from the constructor method by the dependency injection. And next, have a look on our isEmailExist method. We have had enough explanation on this method, so let's move on. This is the index action method of our supplier controller. This method is responsible for searching and listing of supplier objects. Then after, let's move on to the create action. Actually, create action will have two methods through this project. The first one with the HTTP get web and the second one is with the HTTP post web. I have displayed the code of both the methods over here, so please pause the video and copy them. After that, let's see the details action method. This method is used to see the supplier object in the detail screen. Then the next method is edit action method. Edit action will also have two methods like create action method. So kindly copy both the methods. Next method is the delete action method. Delete, edit and create codes look similar to each other. If you understand one, then you can understand all of these actions. Okay, that's it with the supplier controller class file. I hope you copied all the codes of the supplier controller. After that, I have included the supplier object to the inventory context DB set collections. This is very important, otherwise the suppliers table will not be created at the backend database. Then the next important step is we need to add the mapping for the supplier repo in the startup.cs file. Since this is Visual Studio 2019, I am doing it in the startup.cs. But in case if you are using Visual Studio 2022, then you need to do this mapping in the program.cs file. After that, we need to run the add migration command to create the scripts in the migration folder. After running the add migration command, we need to run the update database command. This command will run the scripts which are created by the add migration command and update the changes to the backend database. Then after, let's open the create.cshtml file from the supplier folder. I will slowly scroll down and show the complete code of the create.cshtml. Please take the screenshot to copy the same. Likewise, let me open the delete.cshtml from the same folder and I will scroll slowly so that you can copy the code of the delete.cshtml. Then the next file is details.cshtml. So we will open the details.cshtml to copy the same. This file looks almost similar to the delete.cshtml. Let me remove some of the unwanted spaces and blank lines so that the code looks neat and compact. Then the next file is edit.cshtml. This file is little important, so kindly give attention and copy all the codes. I will scroll slowly so that you can copy all the code. Okay, that's it with the edit.cshtml. The next file is index.cshtml. This is a normal listing screen file, but this has some code to support sorting, searching and pagination. And it also has a partial view to support the paging logics. I had uploaded a separate video on pagination. I will keep the video link on the description, so please have a look on it. Then after, let's move on to the detail section of the index page. This is responsible for populating the supplier list items. Okay, that's it with the index page. So now I have completely shown all the code related to the supplier module. So please watch it and put your valuable comments in the comments box. With this, I am completing this video. Before I sign off, I request you to subscribe and share this video. I would appreciate if you would like and subscribe to this channel so that you will be notified for all of the new videos that I will be posting. Thank you and bye for now.